Here is a pleasure to receive at Federal University of ABC Professor Karsten Zimmermann from TU Dortmund, European Planning Cultures Department. And this is a part of the two lectures regarding two projects with TU Dortmund. The first project is a TAP, transatlantic project, named Impact of COVID-19 of the livelihoods, mobility and accessibility of marginalized groups. Dr.ª is part of this project too, and Dr.ª, Sienna, who more? No, yes. And the other project is regarding planning within global comparison in a post-pandemic scenario, theories, methodologies, and strategies to compare metropolitan cases. This project, Professor Karsten take part, is one of the main source of these theories and discussion for us. And yes, for us it is. Yes, for us it is. In the project. That it is. I will invite you to present yourself and start your lecture.
So you want me to take the mic, or no? I don't have to.
I think
it's okay. You can hear me, right?
I think for the
no, I have this one for the record. Okay, yeah, no, I can introduce myself briefly. I mean, the spring students know me already. There are many colleagues in the room they have met before, so I'm not the first time here at UFABC. Karsten Zimmermann, TU Dortmund. And as Sandra mentioned, my department is called European Planning Culture. So it's my mission to compare planning systems. So I'm the one, in the way you are right, I'm the one you need to ask. So I need to find, at least it's my duty to find the right answers to your questions of how to compare planning systems, even on a global scale, which is a very difficult, endeavor to compare planning systems on a global scale. I took this title, How to Compare Planning Systems on a Global Scale, or the inspiration for this title, a reflection on the post-colonial critique from this book. It's a book from political science. My background is political science, like Klaus' background is political science, and I think, and I'm sure Klaus agrees on this, that we can learn a lot from policy analysis and political science when we're asking ourselves so how to compare planning systems and planning cultures. So it's a book written or edited by American colleagues. It's from 2021, Rethinking Comparison, Innovative Methods for Qualitative Political Inquiry, Erica Simmons. And I can really recommend to read this book. So if you want to have really up-to-date information about what the issues are in comparative political science, and you will find a lot of useful information in this book. And for me, with regard to the question in our project, and also with regard to what we are all doing here, I mean, the spring students and we are all working on an international level. We are all comparing planning systems, very diverse planning systems. In the introduction, in particular, this post-colonial critique was very, let's say, thought-provoking. So this is how the book starts. Comparative methods have seen a double movement over the past 2 decades. On the one hand, political scientists point to the enduring indispensability of comparative methods. Yeah, right, we need this as a form of academic knowledge production. We are comparing all the time, so this is what we do, and we have a good stock of methods and theories that tell us how to compare planning systems. But at the same time, and this is how this continues, on the other hand, in the humanities and humanistic social sciences, comparative methods have come under intense scrutiny. Across these disciplines, particularly with the rise of post-colonial theories, such methods are frequently seen as old-fashioned at best, retrograde at worst. So there's a very hard and harsh critique at what we have learned, Klaus and me, in our undergrad courses in political science. So such critiques have gained particular traction because comparative methods were often used to compare civilizations through hierarchical, evolutionary, social scientific paradigms, and were tied to European colonial expansion. So, right, so I'm from Europe, and I'm here, and I would like to discuss this with you, how you see this post-colonial critique, because, it's really fundamental what the colleagues are writing in this book. Comparison comparisons, so there's a continuation of this introductory chapter of the book. Comparisons are never neutral, they are inevitably tendentious, didactic, competitive, and prescriptive. Comparisons work only when the radical others have been persuaded or downright coerced into abandoning their difference. So I think this is an issue that is relevant for all of us. At least for me and Sandra, it is relevant because we tried to do this, in fact. So we published a paper, and you can see the title, Planning Systems and Cultures in a Global Comparison, the case of Brazil and Germany. And of course, I feel provoked by this, by this book from the American colleagues who say, okay, more or less, you can't do it. You can't compare Germany and Brazil because you can't really get rid of this post-colonial, legacy. Not sure how you experienced the writing process of this paper, Sandra, but I think we did a good job, and we started. I will speak about the way. The new way we would like to compare planning systems. But at the same time, I think we need to take this serious, right? I mean, you're all in a way involved in international comparison. The spring students, I mean, you're traveling from large, far away places to Germany and here to Brazil. And in the spring program, comparison of planning systems, learning of other planning systems is one of the fundamental principles, I think. And why am I here, and why are all the Brazilian colleagues in Germany, learning about the German planning system and so on. So Gerardo is right now in Dortmund, where I am here, and so on. So I think we need to discuss this critique, and do we need to take it serious? Is this really fundamental critique? Did we wrong in this paper, Sandra and me, or not? Or can we still continue to compare planning systems even on a global scale, even when the two systems or the systems that we are comparing are extremely heterogeneous? I think there are several reasons for this. There's a trend that at least I am observing. More and more calls for research proposals are extremely international. So we are pushed more or less as researchers into these global comparisons, right? This is one call that I took place with colleagues from Canada, from my faculty, and from Chile and Tanzania. It's about, climate adaptation and vulnerable groups, and it's financed by, Switzerland, the US, Canada, Brazil, I think is involved, the UK, France, etc., and so on. But the mission was to include also researchers from low-income countries. So we needed to find solutions to include researchers from low-income countries. In our case, it's Chile and Tanzania. And of course, you need to ask yourself, okay, I mean, what can we really compare? I mean, Canada, British Columbia, Chile and Tanzania, and we in Germany, so there will be no case study in Germany because we felt in the end there is no comparable case study in Germany possible with regard to indigenous governance and vulnerable groups. And this is not the only call that is going in this direction. So you're involved in the TAP, the transatlantic partnerships, and there are more and more calls that are asking for these international comparisons, but I'm not sure if we are well prepared with regard to the methods and the concepts so what can we take and what can we gain from this international comparison. So this is why I think it's really a relevant question to address this. So the questions that the colleagues are raising in the introductory book is why do we compare what we compare, how do we compare, and how do the methodological assumptions we make about why and how we compare shape the knowledge we produce. So this is really the issue at stake, right? So because we also did we are right now preparing a larger research group, so we are applying for funding to investigate this issue, more or less, how to compare planning systems. And we did a bibliometric analysis of the leading planning journals, so international planning studies, European planning studies, and so on. So we really read all the comparative articles, and we found out that what the colleagues are doing in these comparative articles is not really what you would expect. So it's always case studies, and in the end all the colleagues find out, okay, we had 3 case studies, one from France, one from the Netherlands, and one from Sweden, and the result in the end is, surprise, surprise, they're all different. So without theory building and so on and so on. So this is why we need really to think about this question, which in a way are a bit old. So why do we compare? How do we compare? These are old questions in a way. But the third question, I think, is really no. How do the methodological assumptions we make about how we compare shape the knowledge we produce? So this is what I would like to talk about. The question why, I think, can't be answered without answering at the same time the question of how, because the methods we use when we are comparing planning systems have a strong influence of the results. So the why question is always closely related to the how question. And we have different options, of course. The main motivation in planning, also in other disciplines, is learning from others, learning from difference. And usually we find descriptive case studies. This was also the result from our bibliometric analysis. So are the other planning systems better in reducing land consumptions? Are they better in in implementing climate change policies and so on and so on? And if they're better, if we find this difference and if we believe that the other planning systems are performing better, of course, the next question is immediately why? Why is this the case? So what is the decisive factor that explains the difference? Then the next motivation could be, and this is very well established in Germany, in Europe, I will come back to this in a minute, building typologies. So building typologies of a large number of planning systems, bringing them together in groups. This can be a first step towards theory building, but as far as I know, in Europe, we never made this step from developing these typologies, and then as the next step, developing a theory of planning systems. Of course, explanation of outcomes. This is, at least in my view, more the political science part of comparative planning studies. So answering the why questions, the why is the planning system better than the other one? So, and usually we would apply variation finding comparison. So we are comparing two planning systems that are more or less equal or similar, and in the end we want to find the one variable or the one factor that explains the difference between the planning systems of the Netherlands and Germany, for example. So this is what many colleagues would do, and this is what political scientists often do. We call this variation finding comparison, and a new trend, well, it's not that new, Marcio, it's about 15 years old, right? Has not really, in planning it's quite new. QCA is a variation of this variation finding comparison, a new method that brings together quantitative analysis with qualitative evaluation. So let's call it like this. But I don't want to go into the details of this method. And then there's the last aspect. What's specific about a case? Individualizing comparison. When we did this analysis of these planning journals of the last, we did the last 5 years, I think. Yeah, we did the last 5 years. We found a lot of single case studies, and they all said, okay, we were doing a single case study comparison. So because we are comparing this case in a context. So why is a specific city in Europe extremely good with regard to the provision of social housing and so on and so on? So you would find these kind of articles very often in the planning journals. So this individualizing comparison is very popular. So these are the different strategies. I would like now to go more into the details of this well-established approach in Europe of building typologies. Sandra is quite familiar with it because you studied it when you were in Dortmund. So this is the most recent contribution to this discussion. So can we find, let's say, planning styles in Europe? Yeah, I would also like to discuss with you if this is possible in Latin America as well. So if you can find groups of countries that have similar planning styles or similar planning cultures, and if you can then build a sort of typology. So this is the most recent contribution financed by the European Commission, more or less by the ESPON program, and it is a case where you would find, and I will explain you in a minute how they did it, this building up of typologies, is extremely normative. So the light blue is a state-led planning system. The dark blue, Germany is dark blue, and Czechoslovakia, Austria, Switzerland are dark blue, is a market-led neo-performative system. Brown is a conformative system. I will explain you in a minute what performative and conformative and neo-performative means. And then there's a proto-conformative system. And then there are two green countries. The big one here is Poland, and the small one there is Cyprus. They are called misled performative systems. So the clear evaluation that these two planning systems are not really worth calling planning systems because they do not really perform very well, which, by the way, the colleagues from Poland would confirm. Yeah. So land use planning in Poland is really a mess because the discretion of the mayor is extremely high. And corruption is also, now you can see the colors better. Thank you very much. So So here we can really ask this question, okay, what's the normative assumptions behind? I mean, how can we evaluate and can say that this is a misled performative planning system? And does this mean at the same time that the planning systems here in the West, in France, Germany and so on, are better, are performing better? Which I would not really, it depends really in which region you are in Germany, yeah, right. I would say that we have misled performative systems also in some parts of Germany and in some parts of France and Spain and in particular Italy. Okay, but I think this is what the post-colonial critique addresses in a way, and it applies also here in Europe, because as you know, the history of the European integration, so we had a division between East and West Europe, and then in the 2000s we had the accession of these former socialist countries, and there's still this, this divide that, the long-standing members of the European Union, are better, performing better with regard to economic development, of course with regard to planning and so and transport, etc., etc. And so this is still, it's in a way quite similar to the post-colonial critique that we have also in Europe. So how did they do this? How did they develop these typologies? It's a very simple approach. They made a distinction between these three types: the conformative model, the performative model, and the neo-performative model. The conformative model is, well, the very classic bureaucratic spatial planning. So the planner, the planning authority, develops a plan and then controls in the end if the municipalities, for example, conform with the plan. So the permission, the planning permission, the building permission in the end is evaluated against the background of the plan. And if it is not conform with the plan, of course, we would reject it, right? So that's very strong in Germany. It used to be very strong in Austria, in the Netherlands, in the past, and so on. And so the plan is really in the center of this conformative model, because everything needs to being conformed with the plan. The performative model is different because it gives less emphasis to the plan, because the plan is less relevant. So there's much more discretion, much more leeway or room for maneuver for the local authority. So this is what the UK planning system is characterized for many, many decades, where the plans are there, so they have plans, but the plans do not necessarily have to be taken into consideration when a building permission is made. Right, so that's the performative model. So in the end, the local context decides. And then there's a neo-performative model, which is a mix of these two types, where there's the idea for a project first, and then there's control, and then the plan is more or less adapted to the project. So it's a way of communication between the project and the plan is more or less adapted, and then the planning permission is given. So this is a neo-performative model, which is a mix of these two planning systems. So this is how they did this, and then they had a second distinction, so state-led or market-led planning system, and here is the difference between, is it performative or a conformative model, and they gave scores from 0 to 5, so 0 would be the ideal conformative model, and 5 would be the ideal performative model, and -3 is the ideal market-led spatial development, and 3 would be the ideal state-led spatial development. And then they investigated all these European countries and made the scores and introduced, you can't see them, right? It's difficult to read for you. So they put them into this matrix, and this is more or less the basis for this map. So, right, this is what I did show you before. And again, I think the debate in Europe is still very much influenced by this state-led planning system, the conformative model. So many colleagues, it's also, when you have a look at these networks that are behind this project, so the leading colleagues, very often from the Netherlands or from the UK. So all the colleagues who were very influential when we discussed European spatial planning in the 1990s, during the 2000s, and they all thought, well, the ideal planning type would be a mix between the Netherlands and Germany, right? So this is what they had in mind, and this is a very extreme normative assumption. So this ideal type does not even exist in Germany any longer, and also not in the Netherlands, but it's still in the minds of many colleagues. So at the same time, this means that everything that is not like the Netherlands and Germany, and a little bit of France, maybe, so the economic development aspect is strong in France, so this would also be good. All the planning systems where these factors or these elements are not visible, this is not, well, misled, this is what they used here, misled performative system. So in order to prove this, that this is, part of the legacy or part of the debate on European planning systems for quite a long time, I'm referring here to a publication of Vince Nadine and Dominic Stedt from 2011. They are continuing to work with a compendium of 4 planning traditions. This is a book or a work that has been published by the European Commission in 1997. So it was the first time that we had a complete overview of the planning systems in Europe. And in this book, or in these publications, the colleagues made a distinction between 4 planning systems: the regional economic model, that would be France; the comprehensive integrated planning model, that would be Germany, Austria, Switzerland, right? And then the land use management model, that would be the UK, Ireland, and parts of Belgium, and the urbanism, which is, Italy, Greece, parts of Spain, so the southern Mediterranean model, where we don't have regional planning. So this was very influential for a long time, and they continue to use it, and I can live with most of the categories, So these are the different categories. Legal family is, the tradition of law, the tradition of how the bureaucracy works, which is of course different in France from the UK. So in France we had a very strong state, and still have a very strong state. The scope of the planning system, that would mean, for example, in Germany, spatial planning means that we include transport planning, environmental planning, social housing, social planning, and so on. So planning in Germany has a wide thematic scope, which is not the case in Italy and not the case in the UK, but it is the case in France. And then, of course, do we have a multi-level governance system? Do we have regional planning or not? Where's the locus of power? Is it mixed between the levels, or is it only at the local level? And then is it public or private? But maturity, is anybody in the room who can tell me what a mature planning system is or looks like? No? But you're all planners, you're educating planners, right? As I'm doing, yeah. It's a difficult question, isn't it? What is a mature planning system? Is it the German planning system, because it takes into consideration all these sectoral plannings, like environmental planning, transport planning, and has a well-designed multi-level governance system, which is a bit slow. This is what we're discussing right now at the moment. So is this a mature planning system, or is it more the UK system, where we have this strong discretion of the local level and the low relevance of plans? So the Italian colleagues were quite upset when they read this population, because the urbanism model is Italy, right? So the Italian colleagues know that there are weaknesses in the Italian planning system, because regional planning, the regional level of planning is weakly institutionalized, it's not very powerful, and it is absolutely necessary, in particular with regard to transport and infrastructure planning in Italy. But at the same time, Italian colleagues are quite proud of what local planners do in the big cities. So this was quite a controversial debate in the European discourse on, typologies of European planning. And I think this is what the colleagues of the protagonists of the post-colonial critique exactly are talking about, right? When we are doing an evaluation like this, mature planning system, we really need to be sure what this means and what the background and what the reasons and what the empirical, let's say, basis of this evaluation is. And this is what they did not very well in this publication. So the big question is, can we do better? Can we compare, without falling into this trap of having strong normative assumptions about what is a good planning system, what is a bad planning system? Because it's not totally wrong what the colleagues say from this post-colonial critique. Whenever we're doing a comparison, we are also doing a normative evaluation of what is good and what is not good. Yeah. The question is, can we do better? And I think we can. Sandra and me, and Analia is now working on it as well, this graphic. We opted for a different way or a different theory. We used field theory, which has, according to my view, some advantages. So every planning system or national planning system, planning culture, you would call it a planning field. But the planning field guides us, or puts emphasis on different aspects of a planning system. So how a plan is educated, who decides in this planning system what good planning is and what not. So we have this professional organization in Germany, it's the Akademie für Raumforschung und Landesplanung, ARL, which has a strong influence, which is a mixed entity. It's paid by the government, but it's also strongly under the influence of us, of the researchers, and we are keeping contact with the practice. Using this organization, it's an academy. So who decides what is good planning? So who decides where the knowledge is produced? How is planning education organized, etc., etc. So this can be done very nicely using field theory. And the good thing about field theory is you don't not necessarily need to make the assumption that the planning culture is homogeneous. So in all the planning systems, there are permanent conflicts going on between different schools of spatial planning, right? So in the Netherlands, there's a strong plea for decentralization. So they are the planners that are working on the local level. They say we don't really need regional planning. So we're doing everything on the local level, and then we are more competitive and we are much faster, and so on and so on. So these fights between the different schools are going on, and this can be captured very well by this field theory, because then you can identify, okay, who is the representative of this position and who's the representative of this position, and how in the end is this issue solved, if it is solved at all. And what you can also do using field theory quite nicely is you can investigate, or at least observe, how are the relations between the field of planning and the field of politics and the field of economy. So how strong is the influence of the field of economy? So that's Bourdieu. Bourdieu distinguishes a society is made of different fields: the field of arts, the field of religion, the field of planning, and so on. So you can at least observe and try to find out, so how strong is the influence of the field of politics on the field of planning, or the field of economics on the field of planning. And this tells you a lot about a planning culture, right? So in Germany, this is what we found out, the planning system is a closed shop. So we have a strong professional community, quite stable, which is good in a way, but it's also quite, let's say, conservative. So we are not very much open for innovations from other countries, and also from the private sector, which is not necessarily bad. And what you can also investigate, and this is important for us because we're talking also here about the global scale. The global scale of planning is certainly not well institutionalized, but there's a discussion going on. So we have GP, and we have a network of the global schools of planning. We have global agendas for urban policy and so on. We have more and more international master programs. We have all these research calls that I mentioned at the beginning. So this is emerging, and this is what Sandra was in particular interested in. So is this international planning field that is, emerging and getting bigger and bigger? How is the influence of this international planning field on the national planning field, or is it the other way around? And our conclusion in our paper was that Brazil, the planning field is quite open for these international influences, while in Germany it is not. So I don't know why. We have the Spring program, I know, but the Spring students can confirm that even in our faculty, you're a group which is a little bit detached from the rest, right? So many planners in Germany are not really interested in what is going on in Sao Paulo or in Singapore or in Hong Kong, because they think, because we in Stuttgart, there's a nice word that a colleague of mine invented, is that the German planning system is the best in the world, but only German people know. So this describes very nicely what is going on in Germany. So why would we look to the Netherlands? Why would we look to Denmark or Sweden, or to learn about planning? Because we have, so which is a disadvantage according to my view. So this is one way, right? This is our result. I think I said most of this before. So we had these tables, and in the end, we tried to avoid at least this normative language. So we are not talking about maturity. We're talking about emerging planning systems and stable planning systems, which is much more neutral. So it's also relevant to think about the notions and the words we are using, right? So this is what we did. So, and I think I can continue here. Openness and closure, planning education. I talked about all this. I would like to continue and talk about the question of selection of cases, because this is very crucial for global comparisons. Most of the comparative research designs follow a most similar cases design. So in Europe, we believe that because of the Second World War and the rise of the welfare states in the post-war period, the industrialization and so on, then the crisis of the welfare state that happened in the 1980s, 1990s, etc. So we believe that most European states have something in common. So the historical development, the social development model, and so on. And this is why we can compare them. So we have a similarity, and then there are differences, and then we can use this variation finding comparison. And most dissimilar research designs are, of course, more challenging and much more difficult to implement. So the most similar case design is quite easy. The most dissimilar case design well, the recommendation from the handbooks that you can find in political science is you need to use this most similar cases design if you're interested in some basic common structures. If you're really looking for a structural pattern or even a theory that applies in very different contexts, right? So the very core of planning, for example. So if this exists, I don't know. We would find it here in Brazil, and we would find it in the Netherlands and in Germany as well. So this is the idea of the most similar cases design. So this allows for the identification of universal patterns. There's a good case of the implementation of this kind of dissimilar cases. So Bent Flyvberg, you may know him, he's from Denmark, but he's now working in the UK. He did a large project on large infrastructure project, mega projects, and he did an empirical study. I think it was more than 240 mega projects that he investigated, and he tried to find out some very different national contexts, and he tried to find out, so what, do they have something in common? So this type of planning, mega city projects, mega projects, do they have something in common? And he found some interesting, elements that all these 250 mega infrastructure projects had in common. So cost overruns, delays, and so on and so on. So that's possible. So this is quite common, and this is a question you would always need to answer before you start a comparative work. Which type of design do I follow? Do I follow the most similar cases design, or do I follow the most dissimilar cases design? I will now try to give you some examples on how we can use this well-established distinction, most similar, most dissimilar cases design, in order to make advancements in global comparison of planning systems. This is a project proposal, it's not yet approved. We're waiting for approval. This is part of this larger research group that we are just applying for. Me and my colleague from Dortmund, Sophie Schramm. We call it a relational comparison in the post-colonial context. So what we want to do is we are comparing France and the United Kingdom and Senegal and Kenya. At the same time, we are comparing United Kingdom and Kenya and France and Senegal. Yeah, because Senegal was a French colony and Kenya was a British colony. So the assumption is, this is what you would still find, and when you read about this subject in the planning literature, that the planning system in Kenya or in Senegal is still heavily influenced by the French planning tradition and by the British planning tradition. But you're not really finding a proof for this. So it's an assumption that until now nobody has really investigated. This is why we want to do it. And at the same time, we can also learn about, let's say, the endurance or the permanence of planning cultures, right? Because when Senegal adopted the French planning tradition, this is a long time ago, and the French planning system has evolved in the meantime. So many things have changed in the French planning system as well. So, what we hope to find out is, can we really use this notion of planning culture, if this exists, if a French planning culture exists, so we would find it in France and in Senegal, of course. If this is not the case, then we really need to question this notion of planning culture, because then it may not make sense. So this is what we want to do. I think this is a new way of comparing, planning system on a global scale from very different contexts, using this idea of relational comparison and the legacies of colonial planning practice, etc., etc. So we will compare Africa and Europe, and within the countries we will have case studies, mega city regions and informal planning, or city regions and informal planning, and we really hope that this project will get approved. Now I'm a little bit borrowing, let's say, theories and knowledge from political science, because we don't have to really reinvent the wheel. So there are many good scholars around the world who face this problem of how can I compare really diverse planning systems on a global scale. And I can recommend to read this book from Jale Tosun. She's in Germany. She's a professor for political science in the University of Heidelberg. The book is old, 2013, but it's still worth reading it, because the way she designed the comparison is very, very interesting. So the title is Environmental Policy Change in Emerging Market Democracies, Central and Eastern Europe and Latin America compared. Because Central and Eastern Europe, after the collapse of the Soviet system, had something in common with Latin America, because you also have these social and political disruptions here, and these post-regime periods. And this is how she designed her research. So she compares two regions, Latin America and Eastern and the CEE countries, and her subject is regulatory environmental policy. really nicely designed 5 sub-areas, so air pollution control, water pollution control, and these kind of things. Both regions have something in common. They share the history of a relatively recent socio-political transformation, regime changes, and so on. And environmental policy is one of the characteristic fields in the period of this, modernization. So when all these Central and Eastern European states became part of the European Union, environmental policy was the biggest challenge for them, right? So because they needed to comply with European regulations. So the hypothesis was there's global competition, and of course there will be less and less regulatory environmental policies. And surprise, surprise, she found out that the opposite is the case. So as a result, downward regulatory competition cannot be observed. Rather, in 3 of the 5 sub-areas, an increase in environmental standards as a result of foreign direct investments is shown. And then she also found out most important influencing variable in both regions, in both Latin America and Central and Eastern Europe, is the presence of environmental NGOs. So this is a nicely designed empirical study that shows we can compare even countries from Europe and Latin America. So the last case or example is even older. It's from the 1990s. David Collier, again, I can recommend to read in particular this contribution to this political science handbook, political science, the state of the discipline, the comparative method. Because what he did is quite instructive for us in Europe. So he investigated regime change in Latin America in the 1980s. So this happened in the 1980s, and his assumption is that these regime changes in Latin America happened in a situation of rather similar geopolitical conditions, right? So you can compare some of the Latin American countries. So within the states of Latin America, he identified 8 states where similar things had happened. So they were similar in many respects. So this is the most similar cases designed. And then within this more or less homogeneous group, he said, I can always compare 2 pairs that are very different. So we combined these most similar with the most dissimilar cases design. And this is a very clever way, I think, to how to manage with this problem of, are my cases really similar? Are they dissimilar? And how can I design a research study so that it's, in the end it's really fruitful and brings something new? So he's trying to link both contrasting and similar cases. And I think we should change the track in Europe. So we should not try to, as the colleagues did, you remember this map that I showed you from this publication from 2021, we should not try to compare all the European states with all the other European states. Because we should also try to follow this approach and try to build up groups. And within these groups, we still have differences. So Germany and Austria and Switzerland have a lot in common. So we have regional planning, we have strong municipalities, and so on, and so on. We are all federal, but still there are a lot of differences between Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. So, and we would use this kind of, approach. We can use, this is my recommendation, we can use this kind of approach to make more out of the comparisons than just say, okay, Austria, Germany, and Switzerland are more or less the same. This is what many colleagues say, but there are extreme differences. So my message here is, and I think this is my last slide, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, just have a look at the existing literature, also in neighboring disciplines, ask political scientists, you can also ask sociologists and geographers and so on and so on. Maybe also the older ones who have been involved in this comparative work. There are ways, and these are also ways of how to avoid this trap of at least having the risk of being too normative. Because you assume that what you're comparing is always the best planning system. Because this is not what they did. So Jarle Tosen did not do it. She had not in mind to find the best environmental policy, the best performing state in this research design between Central, Eastern Europe and Latin America. And also Collier. He was only interested in the differences and wanted to explain why regime change happened in one way in one state and why it happened in the other way in the other state. This is what he wanted to do. Okay, so that's it from my side. I hope it was useful and interesting for you, and I'm prepared for questions.